This is Professor Terry J. Lovell. I'd like to talk to you today about Top Gun Scholar. Top Gun Scholar makes the student totally in control, empowers the student, puts them totally in control of their learning experience. It is a very powerful learning instrument that I want to recommend to you wholeheartedly. I want to show you a couple of quick examples of how Top Gun Scholar works. In my teaching, and I have been teaching at the post-secondary level for the past 30 years, in my teaching, this is the single most powerful learning supplement, technological learning supplement I have seen. In any one of my courses, and BSA 120 is the Principles of Supervision, BSA 131 is the Introduction to Business, BSA 132 is Business Ethics, BSA 237 is the Legal Environment of Business. Then I've got references to the classics, to Christian tests, to the CIA World Factbook, and contemporary critical thinking authors, which is something we're working on right now. People like Victor Davis Hanson trying to set up an internet cafe for great ideas. But basically what I have here is a reference that is instantaneous for all my students. So if you're taking BSA 131 from me, the Introduction to Business course, and you want to look up what we've said in lecture about the EEOC, you type in EEOC and you hit the button. Once you've hit the button, notice that our time here was 0.27 of a second. That's how long it took to go from right here in Arizona up to Canada to the server and get the information back. That's where our motto, education coming to you at the speed of light, comes from. Literally, the information is traveling that fast. Now, many students will remember in a general sense that we talked about the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And they might even remember that we talked about it on Monday versus Wednesday. But to find it in their notes specifically is something that they won't remember. What you're doing with Top Gun Scholar is you take all of your digital notes, whether it's PowerPoint, whether it's the spoken word, whether it is Word documents, whatever you have, you take that and you put it into a format that is instantly accessible to each and every one of your students. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the Principles of Supervision class or whether it's in the Intro to Business class or in the Ethics class, you can go ahead and use this instantaneously to find out what your text, what your course, what your lecture says about particular topics. So in the Principles of Supervision course, if you wish to look up ethics, you find out that in Chapter 3, Chapter 4, and Chapter 14, we specifically talk about ethics in general, and in Chapter 14, the American work ethic specifically. If you're a student and you wish to locate information, one of the most frustrating things that you go through is the knowledge that you've talked about a subject, but the inability to recall when and where you talked about it. In the use of Top Gun Scholar, what we do is provide every instructor the ability to instantly put their students in charge of their own learning. This is classic student empowerment. This is taking the sage off the stage and creating the digital guide on the side. What this does more than any other single thing is make the student absolutely responsible, empowered, and accountable for information. In the past, in my teaching, I've had situations where students knew that a subject had been covered, and when you'd ask them, well, don't you remember we spoke about that in class? Don't you remember the lecture covered that? And they say, yes, I do, but I couldn't remember where it was. I couldn't remember how we talked about it. I couldn't remember the context in which we talked about it. In clicking, and notice that this one came back in 0.06 of a second, in clicking on the word ethics for the BSA 132 ethics course, we find out that we've got it listed in Chapter 19, we've got it listed in Chapter 21, we've got it listed in the contents, we've got it listed in Chapter 20, on and on and on. We've got a total of 285 hits in 22 documents, and that took us less than 1/10 of a second, 6/100ths of a second. What this does is make the student the master of their fate and the captain of their ship when it comes to learning a particular subject. When we look at each of these courses, every one of them has a heavy component of vocabulary. As a matter of fact, I would argue that all teaching is first vocabulary, second mechanics, and third conceptual. You've got to get the vocabulary, the new language, business as the business law, business as the introduction, business as statistics. You've got to introduce a new set of vocabulary in each course. Then you've got to introduce the mechanics of how that vocabulary is applied. And the highest level, the most important level, is in fact the level at which we start to talk about the conceptual end. What is the abstract conceptual end of this knowledge? So here with due process, we got 153 hits and 15 documents. There's no way that a student can seriously use Top Gun Scholar and come back and say, I knew we talked about due process, but I couldn't find where. There's no way that a student can claim that their effort to work on a subject was thwarted by the way the subject is laid out. Now, one of the things that I find to be particularly enjoyable about Top Gun Scholar is that every single aspect of the course is put there for the student to research, and anything they want to find out about is instantaneously available to them. And it's a great study guide, it's a great review guide. It is a great way to ensure that they can cognitively anchor what they're up to. In my statistics course, the Introduction to Business Statistics, I was very, very frustrated the first time I taught this course. Nationally, the failure rate for statistics is about 50-55%. First time I taught it, I had exactly that experience. When in absolute frustration after the first test, I collected everyone's notebooks and I said, I want to see what you're actually writing down. And what I found out was they don't write down what you write on the board. In between the blackboard, the actual physical blackboard or the whiteboard where you're scribbling away up at the front of the class, and their notebook, there is, as we would say, many a slip between cup and lip. There is a disconnect. So when you put everything in a digital format, and all the PowerPoint slides are there, and all of the Word notes are there, and everything is there, and they don't have to be a stenographer, they can become a student. They can learn their vocabulary, they can learn it correctly, they can learn their mechanics, they can learn it correctly, and then finally they can learn their conceptual, how at an abstract level this all ties together. One of the things I want to stress about the power of Top Gun Scholar is that it allows a student to access every bit of information from the course, without having to go to traditional office hours or to email the instructor or to call the instructor. Hofstede, in his great work on differences between cultures, talks about differences in power and distance, gender, authority, ethnicity, race. There are a series of subcultural differences that make it difficult to learn and communicate, that are based on power and distance, that are based on perceived class, that are based on perceived intelligence, that are based on a whole series of elements that an instructor has no power to change. If you are teaching students who fall into certain minority groups, if you are teaching Native American students and you want them to feel completely comfortable accessing the information, you can't force them to come to office hours. If you have Navajo, Hopi, Yavapai Apache, Tohono O'odham, if you've got Southwestern Native American students in your class, for cultural, social, communication, tribal, clan, and individual difference variable reasons, you have to empower them to access the information and knowledge in a way that does not socially threaten them. The idea that I'm going to wait for my Navajo students to come to my office to meet with me for office hours is almost laughable on its face. There's a huge cultural difference in how the learning takes place. What Top Gun Scholar does more than any other single thing is make it possible for individual students who, for individual difference variable reasons, have a need to have individually tailored empowerment. It puts them in charge of their learning style. It allows them instantaneous access, and it increases their performance. I want to end with the Introduction to Stats course. The average grade, the failure rate, was at 55% before I started using this type of technology. When we went with this, the failure rate dropped to 7%. So you judge that for yourself. If you could move the failure rate, especially among target students, from 55% to 7%, would you do that? If the answer is yes, Top Gun Scholar is the program you want to use. If you have any questions, please feel free to call me, 928-776-2345. Thank you very much for your attention.